All right. We're talking about epistles and the elements that are usually found in a New Testament epistle. And so we have talked about in other presentations, we've talked about the openings and closings in a letter. We've talked about the Thanksgiving section, and we've talked about the body of the letter. In this one, we want to talk a little bit about paraenesis, which is a big word that I've just decided to call this one walk worthy. In other words, live up to the teaching that you heard in the body of the letter. And so this is the application, this is the challenge, this is a hope that the author has for the recipients, that they will respond to the message given in the body in specific ways. And those specific ways are a part of walking worthy. So here are the elements. I just reviewed those: the salutation, thanksgiving, body, and then paraenesis is that fourth one before we head into that conclusion of the letter. The paraenesis, the walk worthy, usually is communicated as a command or a list of commands. This is what you do in response to the message that you've heard. So it can be called, this list of commands could be called paraenesis. It can be called exhortation, but that's the section that we're talking about. Sometimes it is an individual command, and sometimes it's a list or cluster of commands. And those things are usually, I mentioned before that most of the letters are pretty flat in terms of authority. But the list of commands reminds the recipients that they have a teacher in Paul or James, and the message is coming across with a certain kind of authority that demands a response. So the paraenesis section is reminding them of the authority and the right to say this is how you ought to behave in light of the message. And it flows, as I mentioned already, it flows out of the teaching of the body of the letter. So whatever the body of the letter has addressed, this then is the natural application, the natural outgrowth of the message in the body of the letter. And it's usually practical. Here are some practical ways to walk worthy of the gospel. So you have the body of the letter, which has the teaching, and then you have the paraenesis, the walk worthy section, that provides practical ways to obey what has already been taught. I mentioned already some of the commands are independent and others are clustered around a theme, like for the church at Philippi, clustered around a theme of harmonious living with fellow believers. So that's a part of the paraenesis. One of my favorite ones that you'll run into in the book of Ephesians and in Colossians is the household codes. Sometimes we don't think about it, but the way that we live in our families is a reflection of the power of the gospel to work in a family and in a situation. And so Paul is addressing in these two letters, helping them to understand how God has designed a family to work, its servants, and how they're to be included in the orderly running of the household. So the household codes come along and they are mutual responsibilities. So you'll have the responsibilities of a husband balanced with the responsibilities of a wife. You have the responsibility of parents to their children and the responsibility of children to obey their parents. Then you'll have the responsibility of masters, those houses that have servants, employees, or most probably slaves, how they ought to treat their slaves and how those slaves ought to treat their masters for the sake of the gospel cause. All right, so one question that you can ask yourself when you're looking at a section like this with specific things that those particular people ought to do for the sake of the gospel cause is, why would the orderly running of a household be important to the witness of Christ? You could probably think of some specific ways in which that can take place. And prayerfully, perhaps you and your family will make that kind of positive impact even today in the community around you. Paraenesis is included because Christianity is not just a set of doctrines. It is moral and ethical behavior in light of those doctrines. So it expects that there will be change, that there will be transformation, that the Holy Spirit will begin to do a work in us that will be defined by what is important to do as a result of the doctrine that is taught in the letter. So doctrine must work itself out in action. Good doctrine is orthodoxy. Good practice is orthopraxy, and they have to work together. And together, then, when we find them in paraenesis, the paraenesis will hold before us a well-ordered life, whether it is in society or in the home or in the church. Those three spheres of influence Christianity should make a difference in. And so that's the paraenesis section. Again, if you want to learn more, any book by Leland Ryken on reading the Bible as literature is a good thing. But there is a multi-book series from Lexham Press that is his most recent. And they're almost like workbooks that you can practice what you are learning specifically. So hope you'll check them out and join us again in our next video.